There are moments in life when silence seems to carry more weight than any words. Imagine an elderly person sitting in their favorite chair, looking out the window at dusk. The sun slowly sets behind the trees, and the elongated shadows seem to remind them of all the decades that have passed. Their heart tightens with a question they may never have had the courage to voice aloud. What truly awaits me after my last breath is gone? This doubt, so human and as ancient as existence itself, has been a source of deep reflection not only for priests, pastors and rabbis, but also for thinkers and visionaries who dared to look beyond official scriptures. Among them, an ordinary man of simple appearance, whose voice echoed like a spiritual enigma, Edgar Cayce. Called by many the sleeping prophet, Cayce believed that Christ had left hidden messages about the soul, messages that spoke particularly to the hearts of the elderly, those approaching the end of their earthly journey and wishing to understand what comes next. And perhaps this is precisely why some of these teachings were considered controversial, too dangerous for the comfort of established religious traditions. Not because they were words without love, but because they touched upon something profound, liberating, and perhaps even revolutionary. According to Cayce, Jesus did not view aging as a loss, but as a preparation. He said that in his dreams and spiritual readings, he perceived that Christ had revealed that the soul, throughout life, not only ages with the body, but accumulates a silent glow that intensifies with the years. For Cayce, each wrinkle was like a seal, each memory a fragment of eternity. What seemed like fragility was, in fact, a maturation of what mattered most, spiritual consciousness. Now imagine hearing this at a time when many viewed the elderly as burdens, as pieces that had fulfilled their role and were merely awaiting the end. What a shock it must have been to think that, in truth, the final years could be the most spiritually valuable, precisely because the fragile body forces the soul to turn to the essential. Cayce said that Christ had shown that, at the end of life, we are not less, but more. Closer to who we truly are, more detached from what is fleeting. There is a scene described in some of Cayce's accounts that is deeply touching. He said that in inner visions, he saw Christ sitting beside elderly people on their beds, holding their hands as if there were no hurry. In these images, Jesus spoke not of punishment or fear, but of continuity, of passage. It was as if he were saying, "You will not end, you will transform." And that word, transformation, resonated like a forbidden secret, because it challenged the idea that death was a punishment or an abrupt end. Many religious leaders of the time considered these ideas dangerous because they opened the door to a broader understanding of life after death. Cayce spoke of reincarnation, of cycles, of learnings that span centuries. But before all that, he spoke of the incomparable value of old age as the culmination of an earthly experience. For him, Christ had taught that the later years were like the autumn of trees, a silent spectacle of beauty, preparing life to be reborn in another way. This teaching did not sit well with many, because it confronted the rigidity of official interpretations. But for those who heard it with open hearts, it brought profound comfort. Think for a moment, how many elderly people feel forgotten, useless, as if they have nothing left to offer? Cayce, by evoking the hidden words of Christ, reminded them that every life that reaches old age carries a treasure within it. The weight of experience, the tears shed, the smiles given, the losses and reunions, all of this is spiritual gold. Nothing is lost, nothing is wasted. At the same time, there is something mysterious about this vision. If the soul accumulates invisible riches, how then do we cross the boundary of death? Cayce said that Christ had shown that the last breath is not a fall, but an awakening, like when someone falls asleep tired and wakes up on a clear morning feeling lighter. But there was a detail he made a point of repeating. Those who age with love, forgiveness, and gratitude cross this awakening more smoothly, like someone gliding on a calm current. Those who cling to hatred, bitterness, and resentment, however, may feel the crossing as a storm. This vision, both compassionate and challenging, brings with it a question that cannot be ignored. How have you been living your later years? Perhaps the answer to this question is the true teaching that many did not want to hear. Because it is not enough to wait for death to come. One must prepare for it as one prepares for a journey to a distant country. Pack your bags, choose what to take, leave behind what is no longer useful. And for Cayce, this is what Christ secretly taught, that old age is the chance to pack these bags calmly, with dignity, and with awareness. It is no wonder that many called this a forbidden teaching, because it is not easy to hear that we still have responsibilities until the end. It is not comfortable to accept that the way we live our last days influences the way we cross over to the next life. But on the other hand, there is no more liberating message than this, because it means it is never too late, that even on a hospital bed, even with trembling hands and faltering steps, we can still transform our spiritual destiny. Reflecting on this, imagine how many times you have felt small before time, how many times you have looked in the mirror and wondered when the years passed so quickly. The message Cayce said he heard from Christ is clear. Time steals nothing. It merely reveals. What seemed lost was, in fact, being etched into eternity. And if it is true that Christ reserved these words for those who would have the courage to listen, then perhaps it is time to let them echo within us. Perhaps the greatest gift of old age is precisely this, the privilege of looking back and seeing not just what is gone, but what still remains alive, pulsating in the silence of the soul. There is something deeply human in trying to understand what lies beyond the last breath of life. Perhaps this is why, over the centuries, so many cultures have created myths, parables, and symbols about the crossing to the other side. But Edgar Cayce dared to say that, behind all these stories, there was a thread of truth that Christ knew and had tried to share, a thread that united old age with the mystery of eternity. According to Cayce, each soul is like a traveler crossing oceans of time. As one ages, the body may stoop, the hands may tremble, but the soul becomes clearer, more defined. It's as if youth were a sketch and old age, the final drawing. Christ, he said, had shown that the years of maturity were not a decline but a process of polishing, much like a jeweler patiently removes impurities until the purest brilliance of the stone is revealed. What is striking about this vision is the inversion of common logic. The modern world extols youth, beauty, strength, while relegating old age to a kind of social silence. But Cayce repeated that Christ saw just the opposite, that the elderly were the guardians of invisible secrets, bearers of a flame that only fully ignited when life had already left its marks. He spoke of spiritual encounters where Christ himself seemed to honor the elderly as living libraries, full of records that time never erases. But why then would this teaching be banned? Perhaps because it took power away from structures that fed on fear. If the elderly no longer fear death, if they understand that the crossing is just a continuation, what human authority can still control them? Christ's message, as Cayce conveyed it, was too liberating. There was no room for threats, only for conscious choices, to forgive, to love, to let go. And whoever embraced this discovered a peace that did not depend on temples or dogmas, but on a serene heart. Cayce recounted that many of his trances revealed images of luminous corridors where elderly souls walked softly, as if returning to a familiar home. For him, death was not a closed gate, but a familiar bridge. And the detail that most moved him was this: the more a person had cultivated compassion and kindness in their last years of life, the clearer and more welcoming the crossing became. It was as if the soul itself carved the path it would take. This idea provoked a kind of almost revolutionary hope. Think of the burden of someone carrying regrets, guilt, and silences. How many elderly people wonder in their lonely nights if there is still time to correct mistakes, to say what remained trapped in their throat. Cayce said that Christ had revealed that, yes, there is always time, that even the last second of life can be an opportunity to free the soul. A plea for forgiveness, a gesture of love, even a silent prayer can transform the crossing into something softer. It is not difficult to imagine why such words would be considered dangerous. If the power of transformation is so close, so accessible, the fear of condemnation loses its strength, and without fear, man ages with dignity. He understands that he is not a burden but a traveler preparing for the most beautiful of all journeys. But there is also another aspect of this teaching that Cayce emphasized. Old age as a final school. Christ, he said, did not see the weakness of the body as a punishment but as a lesson. The loss of strength, vision, agility was not a cruel accident of nature, but an invitation to detachment. Each physical limitation taught the soul to loosen the bonds of matter a little more, as if the body were a cage that little by little dissolves so that the bird can fly free. This perspective changes everything, because suddenly pain is not just pain, but part of a refinement. Loneliness is not just absence, but a call to turn inward. Aging ceases to be just loss and becomes a rite of passage. And in this view, Christ would be beside the elderly not to lament their fragility, but to honor their courage. Cayce insisted that this knowledge should not be restricted to a few, but shared. However, the opposite happened. Many spiritual leaders of his time rejected the idea of a Christ who spoke of reincarnation, of cycles of learning, of old age as a blessing. And so, little by little, this teaching was pushed to the margins, labeled dangerous, heretical, forbidden. But like all truths that carry the weight of eternity, it never faded. It continued to echo in the memory of those who found in its words not only solace, but meaning. Perhaps you yourself, hearing this now, feel a mixture of relief and challenge. Relief because suddenly death no longer seems a dark abyss, but an illuminated return. Challenge because if Christ truly left this message, then it means that every gesture today shapes tomorrow. Every kind word, every choice to forgive, every act of compassion is like a brick placed on the bridge you will one day cross. And what about memory? Many elderly people fear losing memories, forgetting dear faces, not recognizing stories that were so important. Cayce said that Christ had revealed something surprising. Nothing is lost. The soul's memory is infinite. What seems forgotten in the physical mind remains recorded in deeper layers, and upon crossing to the other side, everything returns. As if a veil were removed and suddenly every detail of life, every smile, every tear was there intact. This means that old age is not an emptying, but a storing. It is as if everything were carefully kept for the moment when it will be fully revealed. And here there is an almost indescribable tenderness. Imagine encountering all the forgotten details, not as pain, but as understanding. Seeing your life as a complete book, every page filled, every chapter making sense. Cayce believed that Christ had shown this, that the elderly, upon departing, lose nothing, but recover everything, and even more, understand why each thing happened. This vision brings hope, but also awakens an intimate responsibility, because if it is true that nothing is lost, then it is also true that every gesture has eternal weight. The love you give, even when it seems small, does not disappear. The kindness you offer, even if no one sees it, remains engraved. And also the opposite. Everything is part of a larger record that accompanies the soul, not as punishment, but as a faithful mirror. And this is where we return to the central question. Christ's teaching about the souls of the elderly was not rejected because it was fragile, but because it was too strong. It restored dignity to those the world insisted on discarding. It placed at the center of spiritual life precisely those whom society pushed to the margins. And for many, this was unacceptable. Perhaps the most intriguing part of what Cayce claimed to have received from Christ is what he said about the invisible bonds that unite us. For him, old age was not just the closing of an individual life, but the moment the soul began to see how intertwined it was with others. As if, in the last years, the veil began to lift, and the person realized they had never walked alone. He described images where he saw elderly people departing this world and being greeted by familiar faces. Not always blood relatives, but people who, in other lives or at other times, had been companions on their journey. According to Cayce, Christ had shown that death was not a farewell, but a reunion. And the most moving detail was that no one crossed over alone. There was always someone waiting, like a hand extended in the dark. This point is too powerful not to be felt in the heart. How many elderly people carry the fear of loneliness? How many wonder if, when they close their eyes for the last time, they will fall into a voiceless, faceless void? Cayce said that Christ had revealed exactly the opposite, that the elderly, upon departing, discover that they were never alone. Every friendship, every loving gesture, every significant relationship transforms into a spiritual bond that accompanies them. That is why he insisted that love is never lost, even when it seems unrequited. At the moment of transition, that love returns as presence, as welcome. However, this teaching was not limited to bringing comfort. It also posed a challenge. If we will be received by the bonds we built, then every gesture in life has eternal weight. The reconciliations we postponed, the forgiveness we withheld, the hugs we denied, all of this can become an absence at the moment of passage. Not as punishment, but as revealed truth. Christ, according to Cayce, did not speak of arbitrary punishment, but of natural consequence. We plant love, we reap love. We plant hatred, we reap emptiness. This vision awakened something that few doctrines could offer, responsibility and hope at the same time. Because it meant there is always time, always. Even at the end of life, it is still possible to plant seeds that will blossom on the other side. A belated phone call, a letter written with trembling hands, a word of gratitude spoken in the silence of a room can transform into flowers that will adorn the path of transition. Cayce also spoke of a deeper, almost forbidden teaching that linked old age to reincarnation. According to him, Christ had shown that aging was not just the end of a cycle, but preparation for another. The elderly, with their accumulated wisdom, carried with them not only memories, but learnings that would shape their next experience. Every final choice, every thought nurtured in the last days became a kind of seed for the next life. This idea was harshly criticized because it shook the foundations of religious fear. If there is continuity, if the soul returns, then death is not definitive. And if it is not definitive, the power of fear weakens. Cayce, however, did not speak of reincarnation as a punishment, but as an opportunity for growth. Christ, he said, had shown that elderly souls were like ancient trees. Their deep roots would nourish future forests. Imagine for a moment the tenderness of this thought. How many elderly people feel useless, as if they have nothing left to offer the world? Cayce's message, inspired by Christ, said exactly the opposite, that every thought, every emotion, every final gesture is an eternal contribution. Even the most silent of the elderly sitting in their chair may be planting seeds that will blossom in other lives, in other lands, in other hearts. There is a curious passage reported by Cayce in his readings. He said he saw elderly souls being received not only by family members, but also by those who had been touched by their acts of kindness, even if anonymous. A woman who had fed a hungry stranger, a man who had offered shelter on a winter night, a grandmother who had comforted a crying child. Every simple act became an eternal bond, and at the time of transition, these faces returned illuminated to express gratitude. This vision was not only spiritual, but deeply human, because it reminded us that what truly remains are not riches, nor titles, but relationships. What crosses the veil of death is not what we achieve, but what we offer. And perhaps that is why so many considered these words a dangerous teaching. They shifted the center of faith from institutions to the human heart. Cayce also spoke of something even more surprising, that Christ had taught that the elderly were closer to the spiritual world than they imagined. The dreams that become more vivid, the memories that intertwine, the sudden intuitions, all of this was not a sign of mental weakness, but of spiritual openness. The elderly, according to Cayce, began to hear echoes from the other side, because the body, already tired, left space for the soul to approach eternity. How many times have we heard stories of elderly people who say they saw deceased loved ones in their last days? For Cayce, this was not delirium, but truth. Christ had shown that these visions were signs that the bridge was already being built. Far from being signs of madness, they were reminders that the path was ready and that the elderly did not need to fear. This teaching, so full of hope, still meets resistance today. But there is no denying the comfort it brings. Because suddenly the fear of loneliness is dissipated, the idea of falling into emptiness gives way to the certainty of reunion. And the weight of old age transforms into privilege, the privilege of being closer, of hearing echoes that the younger generation cannot yet hear, and perhaps this is what makes old age so mysterious. It is the time when the body becomes silent, but the soul begins to speak louder. It is the time when the mind gets lost in forgetfulness, but the spirit finds itself in silent truths. Cayce believed that Christ had left this teaching precisely for the elderly as a secret gift, a gift that, when accepted, transforms fear into courage, loneliness into reunion, end into continuity. And you, hearing all this, may remember someone dear who has passed away. Perhaps you recall a grandparent, a mother, a long-time friend who in their last days seemed to see something others did not. Who knows, perhaps now, in this instant, you understand that they were not hallucinating but seeing further. Perhaps they saw the hands that came to fetch them, the faces that awaited them, the Christ who approached with tenderness. What Edgar Cayce claimed to have received from Christ about the souls of the elderly and life after death was not just a set of spiritual revelations. It was, above all, an invitation to view old age not as an inevitable burden, but as the most sacred phase of the journey. It was as if Christ had left a hidden key, and Cayce, in his trance states, had found where it was kept. This key did not open doors to stone temples, but inner doors, those that allow us to understand who we truly are. He repeated that Christ did not come only to comfort the young, the strong, and the healthy. He also came, and perhaps primarily, for those who already felt forgotten, tired near the end, and that in them was a silent beauty that no one should ignore. Old age, Cayce said, inspired by Christ, is like the sunset. It does not have the vibrant energy of midday, but it possesses a beauty that only those who look carefully can perceive. And just as the sunset announces the night that precedes the new morning, old age announces a passage to a greater life, to an unending rebirth. But there is something even deeper in this teaching. Cayce said that Christ had shown that old age was not just an individual preparation, but also a collective one. Each elderly person, with their stories and choices, left invisible seeds that would continue to influence children, grandchildren, and even strangers. A word spoken at an opportune moment, simple advice, a silent embrace. All of this became a spiritual inheritance. This inheritance, unlike material possessions, is never lost. It is like a perfume that lingers in the air, even after the flower is gone. This thought radically transforms how we view life after death, because suddenly the question is not just, where am I going, but also, what am I leaving behind? And Cayce said that Christ had taught that leaving love is the greatest of all works. It is love that accompanies us. It is love that receives us on the other side, and it is love that continues to echo in the lives we touch. There is a touching passage where Cayce describes what he called Christ's great revelation about the elderly. He said that in his visions he saw the Master looking at an elder and saying, "You are like wine kept for many years. Your flavor is deeper, rarer, and more precious. Time has not stolen it. Time has perfected it." This image, so simple and so powerful, was enough to imbue with meaning every wrinkle, every slow step, every memory that seemed to no longer have a place in the modern world. And that is precisely why many called this teaching dangerous, because it restored dignity to those who had been forgotten. It reminded us that the elderly are not a burden, but the fullest expression of the soul's maturation. Christ, according to Cayce, saw old age as proof that life is greater than the body, greater than youth, greater than any weakness. However, this message does not end with mere beautiful words. It brings a practical, urgent call. If the transition is shaped by our choices, then the time to prepare is now. If old age is the season of gathering, then it is also the moment to choose what to carry forward and what to leave behind. Resentments need to be released. Forgiveness needs to be given. Words need to be spoken, because every gesture transforms into a flame that will illuminate the transition. And perhaps this is precisely what makes Christ's teaching, revealed by Cayce, so revolutionary. It restores to the elderly the protagonism of their own story. No matter what happened before, no matter how many mistakes or falls marked their life, there is always time. There is always a last gesture capable of transforming an entire existence. There is always a choice that can open doors on the other side. This teaching also brings hope to those who remain, because if nothing is lost, if every memory and every bond remain alive, then no one is truly gone. Our grandparents, parents, friends all continue to be present in some form. Cayce said that Christ had revealed that the dead are not distant, just invisible for a time. They walk beside us, whisper in our dreams, leave discreet signs in daily life. They have not disappeared. They have merely changed residence. And when we think about this, the fear of death begins to dissolve, because it ceases to be the end and transforms into reunion. There is no emptiness, there is continuity. There is no loneliness, there is companionship. There is no loss, there is transformation. Now perhaps you are asking yourself, why was this message so hidden, so little spoken of? Perhaps because it frees us. It does not depend on complicated rituals, nor on intermediaries. It depends only on a heart willing to love, forgive, and trust. And this places power in the hands of each person, especially the elderly, who often feel powerless. Christ, according to Cayce, said precisely the opposite. At the end of life, you are more powerful than ever, because you are closer to the truth. And it is here that the narrative reaches its most intimate point. Because it is not just about Edgar Cayce, nor even just about Christ. It is about you. About how you choose to live your days, how you look at the years that have passed, how you face the time you still have ahead. Whether it is little or much, it does not matter. What matters is what you will do with it. Perhaps you remember someone who aged with serenity, with a tranquil smile even in the face of fragility. Or perhaps you know someone who departed with bitterness, clinging to grudges they never let go of. These images clearly show us that the choice is ours. We cannot change the fact that death will come, but we can change the way we receive it. And if what Cayce said is true, that Christ left this secret teaching for the elderly, then there is no more urgent message. Because it reminds us that no matter the age, there is always room for transformation. That no matter how much the body weakens, the soul can shine even brighter. That no matter what the world says, every elderly person is a living library, a precious flame, a traveler on the edge of eternity. Perhaps upon hearing all this you feel like giving thanks. Thanks for the life you have lived, for the people who crossed your path, for the pains that taught you, for the joys that marked you. Thanks because every detail of your story has value, every second has meaning, every memory is eternal. And above all, thanks because Christ did not forget you. He left through Cayce this hidden message as a gift reserved for those who have the courage to listen. And this is how we end this reflection, with the certainty that old age is a gift, death is a transition, and the soul is eternal. If this message has touched your heart, share it. Perhaps someone you love needs to hear this now. And if you wish to continue receiving stories that enlighten the soul, subscribe. Because the more light we spread, the more it grows within us.